My name is Emily, and sometimes I feel like life itself deliberately likes to test my patience, testing my ability to maintain a straight face when everything inside me is seething. I'm 35 years old, and for the past few years, I've been building my world with such care and tenacity, as if assembling a fragile sculpture of the finest glass. I run a small design agency specializing in home and apartment interiors. And while I have a few employees who faithfully spend their days in our modest office in a business center, I most often prefer to work from home, where the peace and order help me concentrate better than any music or city noise. I constantly visit construction sites, watching cozy and stylish spaces emerge from gray concrete and brick. But deep down, I've always known, my true workplace is my apartment, my personal island, where every detail speaks of me and for me. 6 months ago, I finally afforded myself the luxury I dreamed of for years of renting. I bought my own place, a beautiful 3-bedroom apartment, designed by me, as if I were creating my dream home, where every line was clean, the colors were calm and neutral, and the space exuded freedom and light. I wanted minimalism, and I got it. For me, it's not just a style, but an opportunity to breathe deeply in a world where there's already too much chaos. I worked hard to achieve this. And when in the evening I sat in a chair by the window with a glass of wine and looked at the soft light falling on the perfectly painted walls, I felt, finally, everything is as it should be. Of course, I have my parents, they're in their 60s, living their quiet lives in a small house, and then there's my older sister, Isabella, who has always been a little different, more practical, family-oriented, busy with her husband and children, 8-year-old James and 6-year-old Claire. We got along, but I can't say we were particularly close. Our personalities and rhythms of life were too different, and our needs always diverged. Just a week ago, I threw a housewarming party, and everything went exactly as I'd dreamed. Lots of guests, delicious food, laughter, toasts, smiles, and constant admiration for my design. My parents looked happy, Isabella came with her family, and everyone seemed to be enjoying the evening, complimenting the decor, asking for advice. And I caught myself thinking that perhaps this was true success. But this morning, a call from Isabella turned my entire tranquil world upside down. "Hi, Emily, I need to ask you a favor," she said, her voice wary, as if she already knew I wouldn't like it. She explained that their landlord was planning a major renovation, and she, Tom, and the kids had nowhere to live for about a month. My heart sank, as if I'd heard a death sentence. I'd been so enjoying my new, peaceful space, and the very thought of someone invading this perfectly ordered space sent a wave of panic through me. I timidly asked, "Can't you stay with Mom and Dad?" But Isabella immediately cut me off. Their house was too small, there wouldn't be room for 4, and the commute to their work would be a nightmare. "Your place is perfect, 3 bedrooms, plenty of space, just a month, I promise," she said quickly, as if afraid I'd hang up. I knew I didn't want this, that sharing my sanctuary would be unbearable, but she was my sister, and refusing seemed cruel. I sighed and said, "Fine, but only take the essentials, leave the rest with Mom and Dad or put it in storage." "Of course, thank you so much, Emily, you're a lifesaver." Her relieved voice rang through the phone, and anxiety was already brewing inside me. 2 days later, a truck pulled up outside my house, and I stood by the window, watching in horror as Isabella and Tom unloaded box after box. When they came upstairs, my living room looked like a tornado had ripped through it. Boxes, bags, duffel bags, stuff everywhere. I couldn't take it anymore. "Isabella, what do you mean? I told you to only bring the essentials." She threw up her hands. "I know, but Mom and Dad don't have space in the garage, and storage units are too expensive. Don't worry, we'll keep it clean and tidy." But the cleanliness and tidiness vanished the moment they walked through the door. My beautiful minimalist living room now resembled a temporary storage facility, and I didn't even have the energy to argue, "Where will everyone sleep?" I asked, hoping that at least here common sense would prevail. "Well, Tom and I will take the guest bedroom, the kids can sleep in yours, it's bigger, and you can move into your office, right?" Isabella said so easily, as if it were a trifle. And I gritted my teeth and agreed. I put the crib in my office, turning it into a room I now felt cramped and uncomfortable in, and I gave my bedroom, my sacred place of peace. To the children, the spare room went to Isabella and Tom. My carefully constructed world collapsed overnight. Boxes, scattered things, voices, noise, and myself, displaced from my own home. For the first few days, I tried to keep up appearances and behave decently, but it was excruciatingly difficult. The children were too noisy. As soon as they returned from school, they would immediately start running, screaming, and fighting with each other, as if my entire house had become a playground where I had no room for myself. But I told myself I could endure this month, that all this was temporary and I just needed to be patient, even though despair was already brewing inside me that my home was no longer my own. Isabella worked part-time, and her schedule was rather odd. She'd drop the kids off at school in the morning, then go to the office and stay there until 2 in the afternoon. Afterward, instead of returning home to spend time with the kids, she'd go out to see friends, either on endless shopping sprees or for coffee, as if her family responsibilities could be outsourced. "Aunt Emily, can you play with us?" One day, in broad daylight, as I was trying to concentrate on a project proposal for an important client, 8-year-old James stood outside my office door with that look that immediately made me lose heart. "I'm working now, honey," I replied softly, trying not to lose my temper. "But we're bored. Mom said you'd watch us," he added stubbornly. And then 6-year-old Claire piped up with her plaintive, "Aunt Emily, I'm hungry." And I felt all the energy being sucked out of me. The first few times, I obediently went into the kitchen and made them snacks, simple sandwiches, cut up fruit, put cookies on a plate, whatever was at hand, just to keep them quiet and give me a little time to work. But after just a week, I was exhausted, my energy spent not on projects, not on inspiration and creativity, but on somehow keeping the kids in line. "You're old enough to make your own sandwiches," I said one day in a stern voice. "Everything you need is in the kitchen: bread, peanut butter, jelly, you can do it." They nodded, though I could see from their faces that they saw it as a game, not a chore. A few days later, Isabella cornered me in the kitchen, her face tense. "Emily, why do my kids eat nothing but peanut butter sandwiches all day?" she began, almost accusingly. I exhaled heavily and replied, "Because I'm trying to work, and they say they're hungry every 2 hours. But you're home all day," she declared, as if it were an irrefutable argument. "Isabella, my home is my office, this is where I work. I have clients, deadlines, and on-site meetings, you know?" I could barely contain my irritation. "So what am I supposed to do with the kids then?" she asked, her voice plaintive. "I don't know, maybe I should take care of them myself instead of spending time with my friends every day," I blurted out, and I immediately realized she didn't like that answer. The situation worsened even more when I had to go to a construction site 2 hours outside of town. The night before, I'd warned her, "Isabella, I'll be gone all day tomorrow. I have to go to the site." But the next morning, as I was putting on my coat and getting ready to leave, she literally flared up, "You can't leave. What am I going to do with the kids?" Her voice shook with anger. "Take care of them, they're your kids," I said firmly, "but I have plans to meet Lisa for brunch." Her indignation grew. "Then cancel your plans," I retorted, feeling my anger begin to boil. "It's not fair, you're selfish," she screamed. But I was already at the door. "Isabella, I'm going to work. This is what pays the rent for this apartment you're living in for free right now," I snapped and walked out, leaving her in hysterics. I had work to do, and no amount of complaining was going to stop me. When I returned home that evening, I was greeted by a sight that left me speechless. My parents were sitting in the living room, watching TV at a volume so loud the walls shook. They are both slightly deaf, so they always turn the volume up to maximum, not considering that it might be causing other people's ears to pop. The children were running around the apartment, screaming and arguing. My parents were loudly discussing something right over the noise of the TV, and Isabella was sitting in the corner, laughing into the phone, chatting with some friend. I froze in the doorway, and my mother, noticing me, smiled happily. "Hi, dear." "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Dad, what are you doing here?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "Isabella called us and said that she needed someone to watch the kids because you abandoned them," my mother said without any embarrassment. "Abandoned?" "I went to work." I almost screamed. Well, here we are, don't worry about dinner, I made it for everyone, she added, and it was indeed a pleasant surprise. Mom cooked a large, fragrant stew with side dishes, and the aroma permeated the entire apartment, reminding me of childhood and cozy Sunday evenings. It was the first real meal in days. But with it came a new level of chaos. My parents were now coming over every day to babysit the kids, and if before it was only Isabella's family that drove me crazy, now the noise was completely unbearable. Every afternoon, my house turned into a battlefield. The kids screamed and fought, the TV blared at full volume, Isabella crackled on the phone, laughing so loudly she could be heard from every room, and my parents shouted over each other and the screen, trying to discuss the news. I couldn't concentrate on anything, neither work nor rest. The only bright spot was that Mom cooked dinner every night, and that was really helpful, because I no longer had the strength or desire to feed such a crowd. On Saturday morning, I had to go to the construction site again, this time about an hour from home. It was a major kitchen renovation, and I knew I had to personally check that everything was on schedule, because such projects don't forgive negligence, and any mistake can be costly. When I returned home that evening, I heard a strange noise coming from the backyard as I was still at the entrance. Loud voices, someone's laughter, music, the smell of roasting meat that hit my nose before I even put my key in the door. At first, I thought the neighbors were having a party, but when I stepped into the apartment and walked to the window overlooking the garden, I saw what was happening in my own yard. It was a real barbecue, loud and crowded, and I couldn't believe it was actually happening in my house. My parents were sitting at the garden table pouring drinks, my aunt and uncle were arguing loudly over the grill, and at least 15 people were milling around, relatives, neighbors, acquaintances I'd never even met. They were using my garden furniture, my grill, and from the look of the food on the table, I immediately realized it was all from my pantry, bought just the day before. I stood by the window for a minute, stunned, unable to believe my parents had decided to throw a party in my backyard without even asking my permission. I was seething inside, but I forced myself to smile, because making a scene in front of a crowd seemed humiliating. I stepped outside and cheerfully said, "Hi everyone. Have a great time, Emily," my dad called out, his face beaming. "We've decided to have a little barbecue. I hope you don't mind." It burned inside me, but I feigned a light-hearted tone. "No problem, looks like you found everything you needed." Honestly, I wanted to scream, but I knew it was pointless. The party went on for another 2 hours. People ate, laughed, argued, someone even turned up the volume on their phone. I tried to sit in the apartment and work on project plans, but the noise was so loud it was impossible to concentrate. And every minute dragged on like torture. Finally, around 10 o'clock, the last guests left, and I watched my parents packing up their things, getting ready to leave. "Mom, Dad, can you help me clean up?" I asked, looking wearily at the piles of trash left behind by their revelry. Mom looked at me guiltily but said, "Oh, honey, I'm so tired, it's been a long day, we need to go home." And so, without waiting for help, they left. Isabella, Tom, and the children disappeared into their room, as if what was happening had nothing to do with them. I spent the next 2 hours alone, cleaning up beer bottles, paper plates, greasy napkins, food scraps, and cigarette butts strewn across the grass. My beautiful, manicured backyard, into which I'd poured so much time and soul, now looked like a disaster zone after a hurricane. The next day, Sunday, around noon, my parents reappeared, cheerful and animated. "We're here to watch the kids while Isabella goes grocery shopping," Mom announced, as if it were perfectly normal. I gritted my teeth and said, "Actually, I need to talk to you about yesterday. You can't have parties at my house without asking me first." Dad frowned, his expression hardening. "Come on, Emily, we were just having a little fun. You're such a loner, sometimes you need some company around here." I shook my head. "I don't want any more parties here, you're being ridiculous," Mom snapped. At that moment, Isabella emerged from her room. "What's going on?" she asked with lazy interest. "I'm telling Mom and Dad there should be no more parties at my house," I repeated, feeling my irritation rising. Isabella shrugged. "Emily, they're just trying to have a good time, you're worrying too much. This is my house, Isabella. By the way, your month is almost up. when exactly are you planning on moving back to your apartment? I said, looking her straight in the eye. Isabella suddenly fell silent. Tom, sitting next to her, suddenly buried his head in his phone, pretending to be engrossed in something urgent. Well, the thing is, we gave up the apartment, Isabella finally managed to squeeze out. After the renovations, the rent will be really high, and we decided it's not worth it. We're looking for somewhere else. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I was speechless. My heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. And when were you going to tell me this? I finally asked. I'm telling you now, she replied matter-of-factly. Look, if we stay here for a couple more months, it won't be a big deal, right? I saw my parents nod as if it were the most sensible solution, as if I was the odd one out. Isabella, you said 1 month, 1 month. My voice trembled, but I couldn't contain my rage anymore. Plans change, Emily, that's life, she replied coldly, and it felt like the walls of my apartment were closing in, choking me out. I went to my office, feeling my insides clench with anger and fatigue. I pulled out my laptop and, without thinking, dialed Marcus, my old friend and real estate agent. His calm voice on the other end of the line calmed the trembling in my hands a little. Marcus, I urgently need you to send me listings of 2-bedroom apartments for rent in the area where my sister used to live, I said, trying to keep my voice even, but hearing the tension ooze from every intonation. Sure, Emily, give me 10 minutes, he replied without further ado, and I closed my eyes for a second in relief, knowing that at least he always kept his promises. I returned to the living room, where all eyes were on me and a heavy silence hung in the air. What are you doing? Isabella asked, as if I were interfering in her personal affairs. Although it was my home and my life that were at stake. I'm getting apartment listings, I replied dryly, not wanting to give her any reason for further conversation. At that moment, my phone vibrated, alerting me to an email from Marcus. I didn't even open it on my laptop. I simply forwarded it directly to Isabella's phone and, looking at her, said, Here, 23 available apartments in your area, start calling. Her eyes widened, and her voice took on a mocking tone. Emily, you're losing your mind. We're family, but I didn't give her time to unfold the usual drama. Family doesn't lie about how long they'll be staying. Family doesn't throw parties without permission. Family doesn't expect me to babysit for free while you spend time with friends. Each word was difficult to say, but I knew I had to say it out loud. My parents sat nearby, looking as if they'd suddenly realized the magnitude of what had happened. Dad cleared his throat and muttered, Maybe we should go home today. Let you handle this yourselves. When they left, the house fell silent. Isabella and Tom disappeared silently into their room, and for the rest of the day, I heard only the muffled sounds of their arguments through the wall, as if it were the constant background noise of my new reality. A week later, the utility bills arrived, and my heart sank as I opened the envelopes. My electric bill, which was usually around $100, had now risen to $280. Water had gone from 45 to 95, gas had tripled, and when I calculated my grocery bill, I almost cried. Instead of the $200 that had always been enough for me alone, I'd spent $800, and that didn't even include everything my parents had burned on their little barbecue. That evening, I gathered everyone for dinner and laid the bills out on the table. I was looking at the bills, I said, my voice cold as steel. If you don't move out next month, we'll have to make new arrangements. You'll pay $1,000 a month in rent, plus half the food. Isabella nearly choked on her food. 1,000? Are you crazy? Tom, without looking up, hissed, We're not paying you rent, we're family. I took a deep breath and replied, Great, then you have exactly 2 weeks to find another place to live. After that, I'll change the locks. They jumped up from the table and slammed the door to their room. The next day, as I expected, my parents came in and immediately pounced on me. You can't throw your sister out on the street. Mom screamed. I looked her straight in the eyes and calmly replied, She's not out on the street, she has options, she just chose not to take them. You're being cruel, Dad added, and I could almost hear the disappointment in his voice. No, I'm being reasonable. This is my home, and I decide who lives here, I said firmly. We raised you better, Mom snapped. I raised my head and said with unexpected calm, you raised me to stand up for myself. That's exactly what I'm doing now." They left. Disappointed, clearly hoping I'd change my mind, but inside, I felt only hardness, like stone. For the next few days, the house was icy silent. Isabella and Tom didn't speak to me, and it was almost a relief. At least the silence had returned. I could breathe, but not for long. I had to leave for 3 days in another city to oversee an important project, a huge commercial job that required my full concentration. When I returned on Thursday evening, tired but pleased with how the meetings had gone, I heard music and loud voices as I approached the entrance. My heart sank. I recognized this chaos. I got out of the car, opened the door, and saw what I'd so dreaded. My apartment was filled with people. About 20 people had thrown a real party right in my living room. The tables were laden with food and drink, people were dancing, people were shouting, and all of this was happening in my house, as if it no longer belonged to me. "What the hell is going on here?" I screamed, over the music. "Everyone needs to leave now." The guests started turning around, some awkwardly rising from the couch, but Isabella, unsteady and clearly drunk, approached me with a wide, challenging smile. "Oh, come on, don't be such a bore," she drawled, and her words, heard over the laughter and noise, were like a punch in the face. "This is my house, and I want everyone to leave. If you don't like it, the door is open, you can leave." I stood in the center of the living room, my voice rising above the music and laughter, and felt a tremor of anger run through my arms. Isabella, her eyes clouded and her smile drunken, mumbled something unintelligible, and everyone in the room suddenly turned to look at me. Dozens of eyes, strangers I'd never seen before, stared at me in my own home, as if I didn't belong. And then some guy I didn't even know by name shouted across the room, "Yeah, this is our place now. Get lost," and the crowd roared with laughter, some even clapped, encouraging him, and at that moment I felt my legs buckle with humiliation. I knew I could call the police right then and there, and everything inside me screamed that's exactly what I should do, but I also knew that escalating the situation with dozens of drunk people around me was unsafe and possibly foolish. I did the only thing I could. I grabbed my purse without another word and walked out into the night. The car took me to the nearest hotel, and I paid for a room just to catch my breath and get through the night, sitting on the edge of a strange bed with snow white sheets. I felt like an exile in my own life. When I returned home that morning, it was deathly quiet. The house was empty, but traces of the night's madness remained in every corner. Trash was strewn everywhere, beer bottles under the table, sticky food stains on the furniture, cigarette burns on my coffee table, which I had treasured for so many years. I stood in the middle of the room for a long time, looking at it all, and a cold determination boiled within me. I went to get boxes and suitcases and began methodically packing all of Isabella's belongings, everything they had brought with them and everything they had accumulated over those 6 weeks of chaos. I folded clothes neatly, as if preparing them for a client, sorted the children's toys, and tidied everything up so that I would be ashamed to complain. Around noon, I heard the key turn in the lock. Isabella entered with the children, her hands full with bags, and the little ones' faces beaming from their walk. But when she saw the suitcases and boxes neatly lined up by the door, her eyes widened in horror. "Emily, what are you doing? You can't kick us out. We have nowhere to go." Her voice broke, and she rushed toward me. I stood straight and firm, and the words flew out of my mouth. "You should have thought of this before throwing a party at my house and kicking me out of your life. You have 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live. I told you that beforehand." The children looked between her and me, confused and frightened, and my heart sank with pity, because this drama wasn't their fault. "Please, Emily," Isabella sobbed, "I'm sorry, it won't happen again." I nodded and replied coldly, "You're right, it won't happen again, because you won't be living here anymore." Her tears flowed freely, but I no longer had the strength to feel sorry or give in. My decision was made, and this time no tears could shake me. An hour later, the phone rang. I picked it up and heard Mom and Dad screaming before I could even say hello. "How dare you kick your sister out?" Mom screamed so loudly that I jerked the phone away from my ear. I simply hung up. They called back 5 times in a row, and each time I stared at the screen and didn't answer. I knew that if I heard their voices again, doubts would begin to stir within me again. For the rest of the week, a strange silence reigned in the house. Isabella and Tom avoided me as if I didn't exist, the children were silent and rarely appeared, my parents no longer came to help with the children, and, frankly, it was the most peaceful time I'd known in the last month. For the first time, I could sit quietly in my office, listening to the ticking of the clock and my own breathing, instead of the endless chaos. The following week, on Wednesday, I had to go on a project inspection 3 hours away. It was a luxury apartment renovation for one of my largest clients, and I knew such work required perfect control, especially over the tiling. I immersed myself in the project, oblivious to everything else, and only returned home at 10 o'clock that evening, tired but satisfied with the result. When I opened the door, a strange feeling of emptiness washed over me. I walked through the rooms and saw that all of Isabella's boxes and suitcases were gone, not a single child's toy, not Tom's clothes. Not a trace of their presence remained. While I was gone, they had left. I walked from room to room, disbelieving my eyes. My living room was mine again, my bedroom was mine again, my office was a workspace again, not someone else's makeshift bedroom. They didn't leave a note, didn't say goodbye, and certainly didn't leave money for bills or groceries. But strangely, I didn't care. All I felt was an immense relief. As if a heavy weight had finally lifted from my shoulders, I spent the weekend completely devoting myself to a thorough cleaning. I washed the carpets, scrubbed the bathrooms until they sparkled, rearranged the furniture just the way I wanted, listening only to myself for the first time in a long time. By Sunday evening, my apartment looked exactly as it had the day Isabella walked through the door. For the next 2 months, I heard nothing from them, not from Isabella, not from Tom, not even from my parents, as if they'd all decided to erase me from their lives and pretend I simply didn't exist. At first, this silence felt strange and even a little painful, but soon I felt how much easier it was to breathe without the constant demands, tears, and endless arguments. I immersed myself entirely in my work, where I'd always found salvation and meaning. During this time, I completed 2 major projects, pouring all my energy into them, and both were successful, bringing not only professional satisfaction but also new contracts. I even hired another employee for the office, and for the first time in a long time, I caught myself thinking about expanding the space, because the current one was becoming too small for my ambitions. I was amazed at myself. Without the chaos, the noise, and the strangers in my house, I suddenly felt more productive than I had been in months, and this inner upliftment was like a new lease of life. And then one Saturday morning, as I was about to pour myself a coffee and indulge in the rare luxury of a leisurely breakfast, there was a knock at my door. My heart lurched unpleasantly. I'd grown unaccustomed to unexpected visits over the past few weeks, but I nevertheless went to the peephole and peeked in. My mother stood there, holding a dish covered with a towel, and I immediately recognized the outline of a pie pan. I opened the door and forced a smile. "Hi, Mom," she responded softly. "Hi, dear," and handed me the dish. "Your favorite is strawberry and rhubarb," she said, as if those months of silence and bickering had never happened between us. I picked up the pie and placed it on the kitchen table. The scent of sweet berries and tart rhubarb seemed to pull me back to my childhood, to a time when everything was simpler and clearer. "What's going on, Mom?" I asked, because a simple visit with pie seemed impossible after so many weeks of silence. She sat down on my couch, carefully surveyed the apartment, as if checking on me, and finally sighed. "Emily, we owe you an apology." I felt a chill run down my spine and braced myself for something I hadn't expected. 2 weeks ago, we kicked Isabella and her family out of the house, she said so matter-of-factly, as if she were talking about something completely ordinary. I was dumbfounded. "You kicked them out?" I repeated, incredulous. Mom nodded. "We couldn't take it anymore." She began to tell the whole story, and every word echoed in me, all too familiar and painful. Every morning, Isabella would leave the children with us and disappear for a few hours, meeting up with friends, going shopping, doing anything but helping. She never helped around the house, didn't buy groceries, and didn't consider it necessary to cook. I smiled bitterly. "Sounds familiar," Mom continued. "She left us to care for her children, and she lived as she pleased, and Tom wasn't much better. He'd come home from work, collapse on the couch, and stare at the TV, no help, no concern. I asked, "How long did they stay with you?" 2 months, Mom replied, 2 months of sheer chaos. The children ran and screamed. Isabella talked on the phone all day. Tom ate all our food and didn't even think about refilling it. I sighed. And the bills? Doubled, just like yours. We even had to pay for groceries on your dad's credit card because we just couldn't handle the extra expenses. I nodded and looked at her for a long moment. Now you understand why I couldn't let them stay with me forever. Mom looked down. We understand perfectly. You were right to set boundaries. We should have supported you, not sided with them. Where are they living now? I asked. We found a small apartment on the other side of town, 2 bedrooms. Isabella complains that it's cramped and that the neighborhood isn't as nice as yours. I shrugged. She'll adjust. We hope so. Mom said, Emily, your father and I are so sorry. We should have listened to you from the start. I looked at her carefully. Her face had changed. It had become tired, haggard, as if she had aged over these months. And it became clear to me what price they had paid for caring for Isabella's family. I appreciate your apology, Mom, I said quietly. I really mean it, and now we can be a family again. She nodded. Of course, but I want you to understand, your home is your home, no more parties and no more deciding who sleeps over. Absolutely, we completely understand that now. And what about Isabella? I asked after a pause. Mom's face changed slightly, becoming tense. She's still angry with you. She blames you for her housing problems, says you put them in a difficult situation. I laughed briefly and bitterly. She lied to me about giving up her apartment. She left me with her kids while she went out with friends. She threw a party at my house and kicked me out. Mom lowered her head. I know, honey, I know. But she's not ready to take responsibility for her actions yet. We talked for another hour. Mom shared family news, asked about my work, and for the first time in months, she acted like a normal mom, calm, caring, the way I'd always known her. When she got up to leave, she hugged me tightly, holding me close, and whispered, "We missed you, Emily. The house felt empty without you." I felt my heart clench and replied, "I missed you too, Mom." After she left, I sat for a long time in my quiet apartment, finally truly mine, eating a slice of strawberry rhubarb pie baked by Mom's hands. It tasted exactly like it had in my childhood, when summer evenings smelled of freshly cut grass, and we sat as a family in the backyard at the long wooden table, and Mom cut the still warm pie into generous slices that made our mouths water. I tasted the sweetness of strawberries, the tartness of rhubarb, and along with it, memories of the girl who once believed that family would always be there, supporting, protecting, and not exploiting. I was glad that my parents had reappeared in my life, that we had managed to reconnect with what had been lost, but I was even happier that back then, at the most difficult point, I hadn't wavered, had stood my ground, and hadn't allowed them to trample my boundaries into the mud, as they had tried to do. After that, things really did start to return to normal. My parents started coming to Sunday dinners again, and we sat around the table almost exactly as before, only now without the tense conversations and without the endless shadow of Isabella that had hung over me for the last few years. It was incredibly rewarding to rebuild this relationship, to feel that love and respect could once again become paramount, that we could talk about the weather, the news, work, laugh at old family stories. And no one would raise their voices or demand the impossible. During all these visits, my parents never mentioned Isabella's name, and I avoided it too, as if we had made an unspoken agreement, not to dwell on the past, not to revisit the pain and betrayal, but to focus on being the family we once were. And the more time passed, the stronger this new, fragile, yet oh so valuable closeness became. Meanwhile, my work was going better than ever. Without constant interruptions, without chaos and unexpected visitors, I was able to focus and take on projects that had previously seemed too large-scale. Soon, I signed a contract to design the interiors of an entire residential complex, 12 apartments, each with its own layout, style, and the wishes of the future residents. It was the biggest job I'd ever had, and I felt incredibly uplifted, as if all these trials had cleared the air around me. and finally allowed me to breathe freely. And it was at this point that David entered my life. He was a contractor I'd already worked with on several projects, and at one point we stayed together after a site inspection, went out to dinner, and that evening turned out to be the beginning of something more than just a business partnership. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to be a woman, not just a strict professional, and it was both terrifying and wonderful. When I told him the whole story with Isabella, he listened attentively, then shook his head and said, "You did the right thing. I've seen too many people allow their relatives to take advantage of them, drain them of their energy and money, and it always ends equally badly." I sighed. "Sometimes I think I was too harsh." He looked at me firmly. "They lied to you about how long they were staying, they doubled your bills, they left you with the kids while your sister was out with her friends, and then they threw a party and told you to leave your own home. That's not cruelty, Emily, that's self-defense." His words were true, and yet there remained a strange emptiness inside me, from the complete lack of connection with my sister. About 6 months after Mom's visit, when I was already living my own quiet, measured life, I went into the grocery store to do my usual shopping and suddenly saw Tom. He looked as if he hadn't expected to bump into me, and he looked visibly embarrassed at the sight of me. "Hi, Emily," he said, smiling uncertainly. "Hi, Tom, how are you doing?" I replied cautiously. He shrugged. "It's fine, the new apartment is smaller than we'd like, but we're managing." "Okay," I said and was about to move on, but he stopped me. "Listen, I wanted to tell you something. I know things got out of hand when we were at your place." I raised my hand. "It's fine, Tom," but he shook his head. "No, Isabella, it's not fine. I should have been more careful. We took advantage of your generosity." It was the first real apology I'd heard from either of them, and I felt my heart clench. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied quietly. Tom nodded. "The kids ask about you sometimes. They miss their Aunt Emily." Those words cut deeper than I expected, and I felt a lump in my throat. "I miss them too. Maybe someday we can work this out." "Maybe," he said, but we both knew that wouldn't happen until Isabella admitted her guilt, and from what my parents had told me, she still blamed me for everything. A year passed, my business continued to grow. I signed more and more contracts, each one opening doors to a completely different world for me. David and I got engaged, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to dream of the future as more than just a never-ending series of projects. I bought a small apartment on the coast, a place where I could escape the city, hear the sound of the waves, and breathe the salty air. Life suddenly felt amazingly good, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like everything had been worth it. Then one day, I got a call from my mom, and from her voice, I immediately knew the news would be bad. She said, "Emily, Isabella, and Tom are getting divorced." I froze, unable to believe my ears at first, and then asked, "What? Why?" Mom sighed, and I heard the weariness in her words. "I'm not sure of all the details, but it seems it all comes down to money again. Tom is tired of Isabella's endless spending and her unwillingness to take responsibility for anything." My first question was, "Where will the kids live?" Mom replied that Tom had taken them in, and Isabella had moved in with friends on the other side of town. She'd taken a part-time job at the store, as before, as if she were always going in circles and never taking a step forward. I felt sorry for the kids. They hadn't chosen any of this, they didn't deserve the fights or the constant moving. But to be honest, I wasn't surprised. Isabella had never been good with money or taking responsibility for her decisions, and now her life had crumbled exactly where the cracks had always been. "Did she ask you and Dad for help?" I asked. "Yes, she tried to come back to us, but we said no. We've learned our lesson," Mom said quietly but firmly. I couldn't help but smile. "Good for you, Mom." She added that Isabella had called every relative in sight, trying to find someone to take her in with her things and her problems, but so far without success, and that didn't surprise me either. Rumors of what happened first at my house, and then at my parents', had probably spread throughout the family. "She didn't contact me?" I asked. Mom shook her head. "No, she's too proud. She still thinks you ruined her life by kicking her out." I felt anger boiling inside me. "Mom, it wasn't my fault her landlord started renovating. It wasn't my fault she gave up the apartment without even telling me, and it's not my fault she left me with the kids while she went out with her friends." Mom nodded. "I know, honey, we all know that now." Another 6 months passed. David and I had our wedding at a small venue by the lake, and it was perfect. Clear skies, a gentle breeze, the scent of pine trees, about 50 of our closest friends, good food and music. Everything was exactly as I'd always dreamed. My parents arrived, and I could see they were genuinely happy for me. Isabella, of course, hadn't been invited, and my parents said that even if they had, she wouldn't have come, still hurt and convinced I'd somehow ruined her marriage and her life. During the appointment, my father pulled me aside, put his hand on my shoulder, and said, "I'm proud of you, Emily, you built a good life for yourself." I smiled through my tears. "Thank you, Dad," he continued, "and I'm sorry it took us so many years to realize Isabella was just taking advantage of everyone around her." I shook my head. "You were just trying to help your daughter." He sighed heavily. "We gave her opportunities. And that's not the same thing," and he was right. They spent years bailing her out of problems she'd created, never forcing her to face the consequences of her choices. And when real life finally demanded adulthood, she was unable to cope. Now, 2 years after all this chaos began, I'm sitting in my beautiful, clean, and quiet apartment next to my husband, running a successful business, and maintaining relationships only with those family members who truly respect me and value my boundaries. That evening, my phone buzzed, a message from my mother. "Isabella was evicted from her friend's house. She's asking if she can stay with us again." I immediately typed, "What did you tell her?" My mother didn't hesitate. "We said no, we're too old for this kind of chaos." I put the phone on the table and looked around my living room. Cleanliness, order, the soft lamplight, the cozy pillows on the sofa, everything is just the way I like it, just the way it should be. Sometimes people think that cutting off communication with family makes you heartless, but I've realized an important truth. You can't help someone who doesn't want to change, and you can't build relationships with those who only see you as a resource. Isabella made her choice, and I made mine. I chose to protect my peace, my home, and my life, and not once in all this time have I regretted my decision, because family isn't just blood, family is those who respect your boundaries, celebrate your successes, and stand by your side not for profit, but out of love. And I was living proof that you can be a happy and successful woman, even if some of your family is a thing of the past.